So our fourth keynote speaker is David Aouad. His research agenda revolves mainly around topics of critical importance with the public realm, such as residual spaces, disconnected urban fragments, urban heat islands, rural regeneration, urban crisis management, and heritage conservation and preservation. His speech today is entitled Neighborhood Planning for Divided Cities. Please help me in welcoming David Aouad.
Okay. So the presentation is built with the mindset that some students today would be watching this presentation from all around the world. I don't know who the audience is, but I guess it's students who wants to enroll in this competition. So I built this presentation about the topic of the city of Beirut. There are some things that I believe should be important to tell. The specificities of the city of Beirut, its diversity, the contrast with the rich fabric, many important issues. I believe the city is divided. I believe we all know that the city is divided, but many of us don't know why and how and what are the urban consequences of this division on the urban fabric. And I think this is a crucial issue because this presentation will show what are the urban consequences on the fabric of this division, what were the reasons of this division, and maybe it will lay the path for some alternative ways of planning, specifically neighborhood planning. So this is like a summary slide that I will go back to in the middle of my presentation, but it is mainly to show the layers. And I think the last question that Hillary asked Aouad was a good transition to this presentation. And Aouad's answer about the different layers of the city and how one should read the city in order to develop any kind of project, and more specifically the port or building within the boundaries of Beirut. So this is kind of summary of the layers that I found interesting while doing this research, and more specifically related to the divisions. I will go back to this in a minute, but I want to go through very quickly. I may realize that I have a lot of slides, so I will try to go quickly through the obvious ones, such as this one. Sorry for that. It's changing. It's not changing here. So basically the city is divided for many reasons. Some of them are the war, obviously, the many wars, poor management of the city, infrastructure, social inequalities, and many more. And while I have no slide to show, I will try to okay, here it is. Okay, perfect. So again, very quickly going to this one. This is an interesting slide that shows, the different eras of the building. In the light blue, we have the heritage building that have been surveyed recently by the Order of Engineers. So a very rich fabric of within the boundaries of the cities. Of course, we have a fabric that is mainly residential and commercial. So here we have some sort of a survey of the completely residential building within the area and the buildings under construction and the non-residential building. I will go very quickly through these slides. Of course, after the blast, there was complete damage of very specific areas of Beirut. In red, we see the building that were very severely damaged, and in yellow, the minor and moderate damages. And of course, one of the richness of the fabric of the city of Beirut are the residual spaces, the empty lots, the non-constructible parcels that you see here. in orange on this map. And the non-constructible parcels are something very specific to the city because actually it doesn't exist somewhere else. This is like a flaw within our regulations. So this is the parcels that are the leftovers of what is guided by our regulation system. So you cannot build on these lots because they are very small, because they are either on corners, because they are sometimes in between buildings, very small facade on the street, lower than 8 meters sometimes. So depending on the zones, depending on the areas within Beirut, these non-constructible parcels change in shape, in dimension, and in surface. So we have approximately 300,000 square meters of these non-constructible parcels within Beirut, and they are shown here in red. Other parcels that are also interesting within the city are the parking lots that you see here in magenta. You have in lighter magenta the empty lots. So we have 3 times or 4 times more, empty lots and vacant lots. Almost approximate 900,000 square meters of these empty lots within Beirut. So added to the non-constructible parcels, which are empty most of the time. Some of them are illegally built, some of them are empty, some of them are used by the generators of the neighborhood because they are, small enough to fit a generator. So we see lots of these awkward moments within the city, and those add up to the divisions that exist. Also, we have the heritage lots, as I mentioned before, with some landmarks. So here you have a survey that was done by the Order of Engineer that shows the heritage lots and the heritage building, within mostly the Karantina, Saifi, Mint al-Hassan, Bashura, Lablat, Rmel. So these are lots that are classified as heritage. Most of these lots and buildings were damaged after the 4th of August blast, and that brings me to the idea of divided city. Beirut is a city that is divided, and although there was a clear boundary, and this shows the green line, the 1975, I don't want to really dwell on that. It's been talked about a lot, but this green line, this 1975 green line, shows a very clear boundary between the East and the West, where the East was majorly Christian and the West was mostly Muslim. And, today we have seen after this 1975 line and maybe all the way up to the 80s, we've seen this line diffuse and dissolve slowly, giving way to hundreds of other thin lines, invisible lines, shaping the behavior, merging identities with territories. However, while these dividing lines have been officially removed, the green line, the climate of divide created by these boundaries is still heavily anchored in the mental maps of the inhabitants, whether through psychological fractures, political obstacles that tend to emerge more often than in the original times of civil conflict. Here I want to try to rebuild this original map that I showed early in my presentation to show how these division lines actually occur. And we see that slowly after the diffusion or the dissolvance of this green line, we've seen the emergence of this horizontal line through Beirut and the core, of the city center. And slowly we start to, because of the infrastructure, because of the Shar al-Halo, the Shar al-Malik, the Independence, Mazra'a, all these roads, we start to see some sort of diffusion of this east-west division towards a more, horizontal kind of fluidity throughout the city. However, these diffusion lines and these horizontal divisions kind of clash whenever they arrive to the city center, which was built in the 90s, and here we start to see how this can become a major cluster within the city. Other kinds of clusters, such as, the camps, the settlements, you have the Beddewe area, you have the Bayet area in the Mar Mkhail zone and the Rmail zone, you have the Karm al-Zaytun, you have Ras al-Naba, you have the duplication also of the commercial centers, the ABC, one in the east area, one in the west, one in Ashrafiyeh, one in Verdun, you have the Mariliers camp, you have the Hirsch Beirut, which is a cluster by itself, you know. Very few people know the existence of this Hirsch, and even fewer people have been there or have tried to even jog one afternoon or one morning or taken their dog for a stroll. So I have been there only once, and it's quite interesting, but unfortunately very few people know about that. So we start to look at this map and we start to understand how these divisions start to shape up the city, how these clusters, how these duplication of you know, functionalities, how the change of pattern and the change of urban areas in the city, how the you know, the diffusion of the role of the core becomes more and more clear. We even see the duplication of commercial areas such as the Mar Mikhail, Gemmayze area in the east side of Beirut, and then you have the Hamra area on the west. Added to that, we have the zoning of Beirut, which is quite also awkward and odd and quite derelict in the sense, obsolete also, because these are very old regulations. We see the Zone 7, which is quite problematic at the east side at the river, connecting the river to all the way up to Karantina. We have the specific regulations, which are Zone 8 and Zone 10, all along the coastline, which is in itself also is a series of clusters. You know, the coastlines with all the private resorts that actually kind of create a certain limit to the accessibility to the sea from the inhabitants of the city. So again, adding to all these clusters, you know, the regulation, the location of the port, which has been also kind of a cluster in itself, you know, since the building of the port and since the clustering of the secure area all around also kind of prohibits you know, the access to the sea. And here I agree with Fuad's comment, you know, about the location of the port. That's very crucial to the revival of the city, but also, you know, opening up for people coming in and coming out. I mean, the port does not have to be a secure, 100% secure area, completely clustered only for the personnel. So why not having, like Venice, you know, a port where people can come in and, you know, and so. Added to all these, you know, physical structure, you also have the socio-economic, you know, a situation that exists in this area. And UN Habitat has surveyed after the blast, you know, the area of Ashrafiyya, Ermel, Karantina, Mar Mikhail, and they have found lots of discrepancies within the economic and social, you know, inhabitants. So we see, like here in this layer with the poor, with the half poor, half rich. It's a very awkward classification, but it kind of depicts a little bit, you know, the divisions that exist in very close areas that once were quite homogeneous. So it is not about sectarianism anymore, such as it was before the 75 and 75 Green Line. So it's more about differences in and social inequalities, like we see in this survey of UN Habitat. We see areas like Karantina, which are classified very poor. We see areas such as Ashrafiyya, which are classified like minority poor or non-poor. So it's kind of divides horizontally again, you know, these kinds of areas, and adds to the division of the city. So as a summary to all these parameters that I just mentioned, we have three kinds of consequences, you know, for the divisions on the city. The first one is the functional consequences, which is the declining central functions of the urban core. And here I talk about, you know, the city center in itself as a completely closed cluster, especially around the Place de l'Étoile. And moreover, when the extension towards the sea will see the day, you know, also looking at it as some sort of a cluster. We have the segregated residential areas with the ethnic enclaves that we see in very specific camps or specific areas, such as Karm el-Zaytoun, Nur Hajin, etc., etc. We have the bipolarization of commercial areas, as we've seen with the ABC on both ends of the city, kind of adding to the division. You have the fading primacy of capital city administrative functions, again, the bipolarization of these administrative functions, duplication of urban functions as well. We've seen, and we see in Beirut, transportation becoming some sort of repetitive nightmare, and with no alternatives. And again, this adds to these divisions. You have the changing functions of urban space, where we see areas such as Harsh Beirut becoming empty clusters for very privileged kind of visitors, and other areas such as Place des Martyrs, for example, that has lost its piazza functionalities to other functions such as parking spaces, transportation, etc., and etc. Just until a few years, it became maybe a synonym of revolution or Thawra or something else. But until then, it was mostly a transportation hub within the city. So again, lost its function of urban space. Amongst the structural consequences of these divisions, we have the changing urban development patterns, we have the road-dominated environment and proliferation of the cul-de-sac, cul-de-sac English? Cul-de-sac? Yeah? Cul-de-sac? Cul-de-sac. Oh. Cul-de-sac. Proliferation of the vacant land, as we saw in the previous maps, and in this one as well. You see the empty land, you see the non-constructible parcels, the parking lots, etc., and the deterioration of buildings, whether because of the damages after the blast or because of natural deterioration, as we see in many heritage buildings within the areas of Mar Mikhail and Gemmayzeh. Also, the third consequences is the socio-economic, which is crucial and very important. The economic depression and the chronic fear, the socio-economic divisions parallel with ethnic divisions. So all this to kind of lead the way to, try to lead the way to some sort of understanding of the city that at a certain extent the city cannot be dealt with anymore with the same way that we have been used to do. And it's sort of generic schemes to the city, understanding of the city as a whole, the creation of major hubs, gathering points. I mean, all these kinds of concepts that we learned back in school and we try to apply during our whether teaching career or professional career. I personally believe that today these schemes have shown their limits. I mean, we cannot deal with a divided city. We've seen it in many cities before, such as in Bosnia. We've seen it in Jerusalem. There's a very amazing book called Divided Cities by Kanner and Boland that talks about these 4 or 5 cities and try to understand Belfast, for example, divided city that have tried to deal with the urban scale of the city as a unified or united city, but failed all the time. Because the city was so divided, the city was so clustered, that at the end of the day, the best solution was to go through these neighborhoods and try to understand the specificities of each neighborhood. And maybe through the definition of the identity of these neighborhoods, then a unified city can emerge. So rather than looking at things from above and saying, like, playing God and saying, oh, I want this to be here, I want the square to be here, I want the garden to be here, maybe looking closer, going closer to certain neighborhoods, critical neighborhoods, such as the example of Karantina, for example, where, and not only Karantina, but the area around Karantina, such as the Mar Mikhail station, 2 streets, very historic streets, which is Brahim Basha and Khudr. And I realized recently, after trying to walk through the street, that quite interesting, in terms of identity, lots of greenery. On Khudr Street, you have the old railway that passes by. You have the Khudr Mosque, which is today a mosque that is surrounded by lots of parasite buildings. So it lost very old mosque in the city, I think one of the earliest mosques And today, this is completely lost and completely gone because of the highway, because of the buildings, because of the parasite construction. So strategic intervention at the scale of the neighborhood and should be led by authorized local community organizations and probably initiating a bottom-up, inclusive, and people-centered recovery process. What that makes is actually it makes the neighborhoods more inclusive. It makes them livable, it makes them equal, affordable, either through land regulations that facilitate the building or new housing, etc. It actually broadens opportunities for people across neighborhoods. It actually also uses performance-based planning, which is new kind of parameters to study not only the physical consequences, but also the socioeconomic parameters of the city. Linking the most disadvantaged neighborhoods with places of opportunity for better transport connections between the location of jobs, etc., promoting and protecting collective public sphere, finally using neighborhood sustainability assessment. One example that I will go through quickly, I don't know how much time I have left, but the area of Karantina stretching, all the way to Hatta Mathaf, all the way to the south, towards the beginning of the, Mathaf area. You have this Al-Khudr Street on the right, and you have this Brahim Basha, and then you have all these neighborhoods that used to, live and used to benefit from the commercial activities of the street. Today, these two streets are completely, of course, non-efficient. No commercial shops are open anymore. There's lots of gentrification happening because of the price of the real estate, especially in the Khudr area around the Shar al-Halo, around right behind Biddewi and the other areas. So all these areas today are facing lots of gentrification, but again, they could be interesting opportunities for regeneration of these small neighborhoods at a very specific scale. And I will go quickly here through the identity and the parameters of the area of Karantina. We see the heritage buildings, of course. You see the vacant land and the non-constructible parcels that are in this area. And if we remove this, we can see that only in this area, only in the area of the study here, you have 23.7% of the total of the lots that are vacant. So only in this very specific area of Beirut, which is crucial, facing the harbor, right on Shar al-Halo, you have the whole Rmel, Ashrafiyeh, and already it is a very dense area. So again, we see the lost space that exists. And these are very small spaces that range between 200, even you have lots that are completely empty that are 15,000 square meter large. We also have, the non-constructible parcels, as I have mentioned before. So here we see a juxtaposition of the vacant land with the non-constructible, and we see how much space you have. The land use, mostly residential, commercial on the ground floor, typical typology of these streets of Beirut. Again, a zoom in on the different land uses of the area of Karantina with the industrial spaces in green. You have the residential in violet, so very rich. The socioeconomic, reality of these areas with the different classes. And this is here also some sort of summary of all these realities that exist. So you have these two extensions coming from Ashrafiyeh through Ibrahim Basha, coming from the river through Khudr, throughout Karantina. You see, these are examples of Khudr Street, where you have these beautiful small courtyards within the buildings that are today completely ignored. You have the railway that crosses next to Armenia Street, beautiful railway, even the traces. I'm not being nostalgic, and I don't think the objective of this presentation is to say that we want to bring back these old traces, whether railways or other, but all I'm saying that we have a certain richness in the urban fabric that can contrast with the division that exists on the city scale. So it is important, I believe, anytime we want to think about interventions on the city scale, that we kind of juggle between the scale of the neighborhood, the scale of the unit, and the city scale that comes, in my opinion, on a second layer. So you see here the Ibrahim Basha Street, few images. And you see that's my last slide, you know, the richness of this urban fabric on so many different sample areas. For example, in Ibrahim Basha, you see in the orange, on the non-constructible parcels and the vacant land, you have the heritage building in red, you have the regular built fabric in dark, and then you have in dark orange, you have the small non-constructible parcels. So these are El Khudr as well, and in Shar al-Halo as well. So this is a very rich and very complex fabric that the city has. Unfortunately, you know, the interventions that happened during the past years on the city never took advantage of this complexity. And the more interventions we have on the city scale, the more we lose this richness. Because most of these lots, like 2 years ago, you had maybe 2 times more of non-constructible parcels. Today, these parcels are being, you know, merged together to create bigger parcels and to give more built-up space for developers. So these small-scale parcels can play a big role. The vacant lots as well, you know, the interstitial space, the right-of-ways. So all this richness actually is available, is there. All we have to do is just, you know, zoom in and try to understand these neighborhoods in order to achieve a certain unity at the city scale, but step by step. A 3D view of the city with maybe some interventions around the Quarantine area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So, David. لا بس أنت. Sorry, عن جد sorry. Okay, so you were talking about voids, the unconstructible parcels. Okay, so what do you suggest us doing with these voids? Like, how can we make use of these voids?
Well, the fact that you acknowledge the void is already a very good start. The fact that you legalize the presence of the void is also a good start. The fact that you prohibit people from benefiting of the voids to merge them with other parcels. So actually regulation, trying to understand that these voids are within the city, they are interesting elements of the city, they are the smallest unit within the city in terms of regulation. Sometimes you have parcels of 5 square meters, which is very small, and I saw them. You can't even know that they are there. They are part of a sidewalk. But 5 square meters, I mean, you can put a bench or you can, and this is public space most of the time. So just acknowledging the fact that they are there is quite important. Doing something with them is a different story. I think it depends also on the area. It depends on what the neighborhood needs in terms of facilities. So it can depend. I don't want to give solutions for these non-constructible parcels. I just want to say it needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be legalized as well in terms of regulation.
Okay. Another thing is that we all know that there are a lot of underprivileged people in Beirut who are probably not noticed by anybody recently. So And due to gentrification and people building in the city, no one will ever look at these people or give them any importance. They just want them to leave to rural cities and just leave and take their land and build anything instead of it. So what can we do about these people so that they wouldn't be forgotten at a certain point? How can we react to this?
I think this is the most difficult question in any city, but the idea of neighborhood planning, and dealing with neighborhood at the scale of the inhabitants kind of brings back these privileges. Anytime you try to deal with the city at the city scale, you kind of say, okay, this is not important, this is not important, this is going to go to the extent of a better solution or a better idea. But if you go to the neighborhood or even the street inside the neighborhood and you say, okay, today I want to start planning, I want to create a committee made of the people who live in this street. I want to put together certain experts in order to understand what is needed. If there is social inequality, then I'm going to repair this inequality. If there is a gentrification happening, it will be taken in consideration. So the risk of gentrification in neighborhood planning is much less than in regular planning, at the scale of the city. So I think dealing with the situation at this scale can prevent, bigger projects from completely ignoring these kinds of social classes that you are mentioning.
Okay. So do you think that there's a question from a person on the media who's asking that if you think that we should get loose of the complexity in the urban fabric or work with the complexity?
Should we get?
Loose, like leave the get rid of, yeah.
No, at the contrary, I think this is what makes the city specific. What I'm saying is that there is a contrast between the obvious division within the city at the city scale, and there's a very rich fabric that exists on a very small neighborhood scale. And we should deal with both, I think. Of course, we should not get rid of it, at the contrary.
Okay, and what about the physical boundaries present in the city and the areas surrounding the port, like the bridges,
yeah, I understand. Of course, one of the things I talk about is Shar Halo, but we have to face the reality of things. We have a coastline, we have the river of Beirut, we have Shar Halo, we have certain infrastructure that cannot be changed. But what we can do is, for example, clear the clusters on the coastline. We can regenerate the river into a different kind of project. We can clear the clustering of the harbor, of the port. So we can use the existing infrastructure to regenerate certain areas just by changing, just by bringing back things to, decluttering. I think this is very important.
Okay. So do we have any question from the crowd? Oh, we have two questions.
Okay, hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this interesting presentation. My name is Yara. I'm an architect. My question is, some parts of Beirut are vibrant, some others are dead. Do you think that we plan in terms of urbanity to inject life in the dead?
We think we plan?
Do you think that we should plan in terms of urbanity to inject life in the dead? And how?
On a personal level, I don't believe you can inject anything into anyone. You have to deal with the existing situation. You have to deal with the reality and the specificities of each of these areas. And this is why I say dealing with the neighborhoods, understanding the neighborhoods, planning on the neighborhood scale is crucial. I mean, you cannot build social housing in Rmel as you would, for example, in Basta. You have to think of how things work. You have to look at the social habits. You have to look at how things function, how things have functioned for a certain time. There is no generic solution. And the mistakes that we've made for a long time, not only on the scale of city of Beirut, but also, on the scale of the country itself, very generic solutions, very few, but always generic, always mistaken, always on the side, We need to zoom in. We need to understand this richness that I'm talking about is incredible. And it would be a shame to say I'm going to inject life here just because I need to inject something. Maybe the solution is somewhere else,
Okay,
So
thank you.
I don't know, but I mean, it is very specific, and this is the crucial thing.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tanya, an architecture student. First, thanks for this amazing presentation. And I have a question. How can the port be part of the urban fabric and these all key criteria that you have explained?
What I mentioned is that the port is a cluster within the city today. I mean, it's somewhere. Have you ever been to the port? No. Before the blast, probably never. You don't know what is inside the port, except if you are passing on the highway and you just sneak a peek. So it is a completely clustered area, off track. You cannot go there. What I'm saying is that this is a fact. This is a reality. It's like the camps. It's like the Harsh Beirut. It's like the clusters on the coastline. It's like the city center. Have you been to the city center lately? It's been 2 years, 3 years I haven't been there. You cannot go there. It's clustered, around Place de l'Étoile. It's like a military zone. So what I'm saying is that this exists. This is part of the divisions of the city, and the consequences of these divisions is what is happening today. So, of course, the harbor should be part of the city. Look at cities like Rotterdam. Look at cities like Barcelona. The harbor is the core of the life, of the vibrant life. This is what people do when they get to Oslo, for example. When they get to Barcelona, they go to the port, This is where everything happens. So we have an amazing opportunity. Again, I'm not going to talk about solution. This is not really what I wanted, what the message was today. All I wanted to say is that this exists. These are some of the problems we have. We just need to shift our focus from a certain scale to another scale.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. We're gonna go for a very short break right now, like a 10-minute break. Okay, so.